Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BOA The Revival. Really excited about this program this week. I want to say tonight's program, but we're taping it actually at noon on a Saturday because our guest, Amy Boucher, is all the way over in England, and she writes the blog Nearly Knowledgeable, and she's a writer and folklorist who covers really the Shropshire area of England. It's a county in England. She's going to tell us all about it. I had to find it on a map, I'll admit. I was like, this is a new area that I had really not heard of. But much like all of England, it's rich with folklore and amazing stories. And I stumbled on Amy's work over the summer. We've been trying to get this one put together for a while. Thankfully, some serendipity got us back in contact. So I'm really looking forward to this one. This one's, like I said, one I've been wanting to do for a while. So welcome to the show, Amy. I can't wait to chat.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm teaching. I'm a teacher by day, and teaching takes up all of your time. So that's why there's been a bit of a delay. But also, don't worry about not being able to find Shropshire or knowing about Shropshire, because there's people in England that haven't got a clue as well. To the point where when I was in university, someone was like, "Oh, you're from Shropshire," and I got really excited because I was like, someone's actually going to know where it is. And they went, "That's in Scotland, isn't it?" And I was like, no, you can't be further from the truth. Like, it's nowhere near Scotland. I don't sound Scottish. So yeah, I think Shropshire has this reputation as being somewhere that's quite, people have heard of it, but they don't necessarily know anything about the county. And there's so much history and folklore and weirdness here. So it's really exciting to be able to share some of that tonight. Well, today.
Nice. There you go. Yeah. Well, we always start out with the new guest, the bio, the background. You know, who is Amy Boucher? How'd you get mixed up in all this? What led you to folklore, and then to really sort of covering and embracing Shropshire in particular? Yeah.
So I grew up in Shropshire. I grew up. I nearly said I've always been from Shropshire then, but that's obvious because I grew up here. Ignore me. It's only going to get weirder. But I think growing up in Shropshire, it's a place where there is so much history. There's medieval. I grew up down the road from medieval monasteries. There was the Iron Bridge, which is kind of the crucible, the birthplace of industry in a lot of ways, and spearheaded the Industrial Revolution for arguably the world. So I was a bit spoiled really for history. So I was only really ever going to be a fan of history. I went away and did a history degree, moved around England for a little bit up in the northwest of England. But then I really wanted to do something for myself around the pandemic. I was working in quite a stressful environment, and I wanted something for me. I wanted to write and just share history. But whenever I wrote about historical things I really like the early medieval period or medieval history, I was like, this is good, but I'm a bit bored. And it would surprise me because I love that period of history, or I love the things I was sharing. But then I felt myself naturally returning to home and naturally sharing some of the things that I grew up being told about. And that's really is a theme that's run through my whole work, my whole research. And it's not that I don't think that other areas are not interesting or other periods aren't interesting of history or folklore. It's just that I feel like I'm here to share the stuff about Shropshire, and that's my role. Folklore, I think the reason I turned to folklore over, say, more mainstream kind of historical writing is because I grew up very much in a world that was enhanced by it, a landscape that was folklore was used to explain it. It's not to say that I believed these things, though I did believe in fairies and witches when I was a kid, and probably now. But my granddad, and I've probably told this story a million times, and he'd be pleased to know he's got notoriety in places as far afield as the States now. But my granddad used to tell all sorts of tall tales and stories, and he wasn't a professional storyteller, but he just liked spinning a yarn. And he used to tell me that one day he'd met the devil. And he was so convincing when he shared this story. And apparently, as a boy, he'd snuck out of church in Ironbridge and he was playing cards with his mates on a Sunday. And then the devil put a cold hand upon his shoulder and told him that if he carried on missing church, he would be seeing a lot more of him. And I was enthralled by this story when I was a kid, and more so than I think probably other things he shared, but I liked his other tales from the local area. And I'd kind of be like, well, what did the devil look like, and how did he say, and all these kind of things, and what happened after? And he'd just leave the story there. He was like, nope. I've told you that now. You're not knowing anything else. So I think I've always had an appreciation for folklore. And I think actually we can understand a lot about the past through understanding the stories that ordinary people, everyday people told. So it's really become very important to me to share them. And also when there are stories that have a historical precedence, peeling away the folklore and looking at the person behind the story. So that's really where I'm at, why I do what I do. And I like weird and wonderful things. I've always been a bit of a goth. I'm a part-time one now because I teach. But I think I've never got bored of Shropshire. I've never got bored of our stories, and I've never got bored of sharing them, which is good.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. I love it. You really, you love your area so much. It's really, it's commendable. Now we'll jump right in, and let me get the plug in correctly here, because I said Nearly Knowledgeable is the blog, but to find it, people need to go to nearlyknowledgeablehistory.blogspot.com. So that's where they can find it, and it is fantastic. It is amazing. For all the guests, I sit down, I start digging into their stuff. And I started reading your stuff, and first of all, it's fantastically written. Thank you. You're an outstanding writer, and it's just in depth. As I was reading that first blog post, I was kind of like, we got a problem here because this is so good that we could do a whole show just on this one blog post. This is amazing. So, I threw like maybe 3 or 4 at you here before we got set up today. So. Because there's so much you could dig into. And like I said, I think just this first one we're going to dive into could be the whole show for all I know. It's so tremendous. And that's witchcraft in Shropshire. And you go through, we're going to go through it now in a sense, but like you take us through a journey of how this came about, what it was like there, the preventative methods used, and some of these famous witches, and just a tremendous amount of stuff. So I guess let's dive into that. Let's talk a little, I guess, sort of give me just a thumbnail here on just witchcraft in Shropshire. When was this going on? When was the time period of kind of like this when this was something that was part of like the culture in a way? I guess it still is in some ways, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So witchcraft, it's worth knowing that at least in Shropshire's context, witchcraft is very different compared to other parts of England, other parts of probably even the world. There'd be places that it had a similar precedence, but in the sense that it wasn't persecuted in a legal sense very much.
Okay, yeah.
So a lot of our records come from kind of the 1500s through to surprisingly late. We have accounts from like the 1950s where people talk about a woman who is wonderfully named Molly Delight, who lived at the foot of the Wrekin. If she doesn't sound like a character, I don't know what is. And she was supposed to be a witch who walked around speaking in tongues and fed communion wafers to frogs, and that was the 50s. So it's had a very long precedence in the county, and socially it was persecuted. You might be ostracized from society or kept out of society, but certainly witch trials aren't a thing really in the county. We have very few recorded witch trials, and a lot of them are in kind of the 1500s through to about the middle of the 1600s.
Yeah.
And even then, the ones that we know were witch trials almost always get either thrown out of court because the local justice of the peace is like, what's this got to do with me? I've got to go catch criminals. But they're not really persecuted in the same way that places like Essex were, or East Anglia or other parts of England. And I think that is interesting in itself. And what I think is most interesting is that witchcraft is so ingrained in daily life in Shropshire from the records we have, and from that it would be very hard to prosecute. So there's a wonderful quote that says from Charlotte Byrne, who was a folklorist who collected folklore in around about the 1880s, 1870s. And she says that witchcraft is so ingrained in the bones of Shropshire folk that you could scarcely know what was witchcraft and what wasn't. I'm paraphrasing there a bit.
Yeah.
But it's just part of daily life. And I think one of the most perfect examples of that is the preventative measures for witchcraft, because actually a lot of these practices are ritualistic, or they're things that people do to keep witchcraft away from the home, away from the hearth. But actually, it's witchcraft in itself.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
So it's very much, it's like, I am going to do something magical to protect the house or the hearth from maleficent magic. And that's where you could get the more modern understanding of kind of white witchcraft and black magic coming into play, but that's not really in the conversation in at least in Shropshire's context. But there's loads of ways that you can protect the home, or you get a lot of churches, a lot of kind of medieval going through to the early modern period. There's a massive boom in building churches in Shropshire, and loads of them have protective measures as well. So a common one is a hexafoil, so the daisy wheel, and it's a carving in the shape of kind of like a 5-pointed flower in a way, in a circle, and that was meant to keep the devil away and keep witchcraft away. And that tends to be more in your ecclesiastical buildings more than anything. But if you want to protect the house, there's a number of different ways you can do it, and I think the wealth of sources in Shropshire highlights the idea that witchcraft was a tangible threat. I think with folk belief, it's hard to quantify at times. Certain areas we can quantify it more than others, but we can't say, for definite every single person in 17th century Shropshire was terrified of witches. We can look at the records we do have of these kind of things and go, actually, this belief existed enough for someone to write it down. And you've got things like the kind of certain plants. A lot of things are quite natural or quite easy to get your hands on to protect the home. So rowan, the tree rowan, is incredible for house protection and preventative magic. So if you wanted to protect your home, you might gather some rowan wood, put it in like a bunch, and hang it over the threshold. That's kind of in most of Shropshire. It's recorded. There's another way that rowan can be used as well. So in South Shropshire, they would make crude kind of little crosses out of rowan sticks, tie them with red twine, and hang them over the threshold as well. Tends to be either doors, windows, the fireplace. They're all places that are quite liminal, and they're places that the devil can get in or witches can get in. So you would place them there. Other plants, kind of mountain ash, very good. Witch hazel, very good again. Also, ash in general, ash trees have a fascinating mythology just across the world, and I could kind of go off on a tangent about that, but ash was very good at protecting the house, but also your spiritual well-being. So if you hung ash boughs above the bed, it was meant to prevent nightmares, and ensure that you didn't have any evil spirits kind of giving you bad dreams and things like that. you've got thorns as well, because believe it or not, apparently the devil hates sharp things. I think probably most of us hate sharp things. You know, no one wants to get stabbed. But a t-shirt quote in itself, isn't it, that? But apparently if you gather thorns from kind of the natural world and hang them up above the threshold, that again ensures that the devil and witches won't come into your house. So it's kind of, in many ways, I've heard it being referred to, protective magic, as like the burglar alarm of the early modern period. And to a certain extent, it is. But I think it goes a bit further than that. I think even if you didn't necessarily believe these things, it was a way that you could control the uncontrollable. So
yeah, that makes sense.
If you felt powerless by a situation, or you felt powerless by something, by following this formulaic kind of thing and doing something, you were able to kind of reclaim a little bit back. And there are some fairly common ones. So for example, shoes, a shoe in a chimney, or buried under the boundary stone, or the hearthstone, or the doorstep, and they're found all across Shropshire, but particularly towards the Welsh border, because Shropshire is a county that borders Wales, and a lot of our history and our cultural kind of legacy does take influence from Wales at times. Coins as well. Coins. I don't personally have any spare coins at the moment because it's a long month, January. But if you have some coins, place them in the threshold above the kind of front door, or up in the chimney, and that was meant to keep away evil. So there's lots of things you can practically do with stuff you can pretty much find either around your house.
Yeah.
Or even kind of in your kind of garden or something like that, that actually can protect you and protect your family. I think probably my favourite example of protective magic comes from my local area. So I grew up in I suppose it's a town really. I grew up in Telford, which is a relatively new town, but it was made up of like loads of villages. So in the 60s, they were like, how dare you have villages? Let's make it into a town. And they made it kind of fancy for the time. And maybe not now, but it was at the time. And I grew up in a place called Madeley. And in 1882 in Madeley, there was said to have been a written charm found. And it's in the newspaper archives. And you've got lots of kind of journalists in the Victorian times going, oh, look at this quaint thing we found. Look at this quaint example of people being superstitious, because they love superstition in the Victorian times. And basically there was a bloke and he was cleaning his chimney, and there's one record in one of the newspapers that said he was reluctantly doing it because his wife had basically been asking him to do it for quite a while, and he'd been putting it off, as you do.
Yeah.
And he was cleaning it out, and this piece of paper fell out of his chimney, and he opened it because he thought, well, I haven't put that there. And on the piece of paper, it said, I charge all witches and ghosts to depart from this house in the name of Alpha, Omega, and Jehovah, which I just think is brilliant. It sounds like it should be on a heavy metal album. Powerful language. And it's quite a rare example of a written charm. We don't have many examples of it in Shropshire. We know they happened, but we just don't have many of them found. And I think what's the most interesting thing about this charm is the religious language being used.
Yeah.
So much of our witchcraft or our kind of charms and magical spells mirrored religious language. And that can be seen in a number of ways. It can be seen in, probably quite wrongly, the idea that they're trying to mock religion, or they're trying to do kind of a perversion of religious rituals, which was the more traditional idea of what these things were. But actually it's all linked, in my opinion at least, to the power of religious language.
Yeah.
If you were in a semi-literate society, which so many of kind of my part of Shropshire at least would have been, it was very much an industrialised working class area. The most powerful language you're going to hear is in the pew on a Sunday. So if you can mirror that language, and if you can find somebody that can actually use that language for charming, not only does it give it kind of cultural legitimacy, but also it's that potent, powerful words. We know words have power and words are powerful things, but religious language really does, I think, give it that extra oomph, because who probably the most colourful language you'd hear is down the pub, but the most powerful language would be in the church. It was a religious society, and I think that probably leads me to where I'll shut up for a bit about magic. But there's a misinterpretation, I think, that witchcraft is this continuation of paganism. We're the granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yes, to a certain extent, magical practice has had a continuity since antiquity and was part of the pagan world. But so much of the things that we've just mentioned and the magical practice existed in a world that was ruled by Christianity, a world that was understood through the Christian lens. So therefore, using religious language legitimizes it and makes it okay. It's not like the evil magic that the witches do out on the hills of a night time. It's magic that's proper, because I'm talking about God, and I'm talking about, there's examples where St. Peter is mentioned or Jesus is mentioned, and it legitimizes a practice and separates it from the sort that witches do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes, it's like an evolution in a sense.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. Yeah, it makes me, as you were talking about all that, I was thinking to myself too, it's like the people back then, like everybody went to church, right? And now it's like I couldn't even fathom, but I can't imagine that everybody in town is going to church every Sunday. Maybe they still do out there. I don't know, but certainly not like here. And even when I was growing up as a kid, it was like a lot of people went to church. So yeah, it's interesting. Life was so different back then. It's just crazy, you know. Now, one of your specialties is a particular character is Anne Morgan, or Nanny Morgan. You've given presentations on this. Is one of your favorite topics. I know that from looking into your stuff. So talk about Anne Morgan, or Nanny Morgan. Who is this character, and what makes her story so fascinating?
Oh, so we've opened a can of worms here. I'll let you. So Anne Morgan is just, I've probably dedicated about 3 years of my life to researching her, to finding out what I can about her story and who she was as a person away from the folklore. And I'll start probably with the folkloric idea. So when I was first introduced to Anne Morgan, it was the idea that she was the wicked witch of Much Wenlock, and she was so wicked and evil, and she cursed everyone, and everyone was scared of her, and she was like the witches of old, and eventually she got killed and she was murdered, but it's okay because she's a wicked witch and she deserved it, and how dare you bring witches, and she still haunts the local area. And she's
question, just so I can wrap my mind around. What year was this? Like when was all this? When was she said to haunt the area, if you will?
So she died in 1857, so it's relatively late in terms of the history of witchcraft. Okay. But there's been modern accounts. I think the most modern account of a sighting of her has been like the 1970s, 1980s, where she was said to have been seen by drivers. There was a police officer that was said to have seen a ghost. And it's not to discredit the idea that she's haunting the area.
I didn't necessarily mean haunt in the sense. I kind of meant like, when is she said to have lived in the area? I guess it's kind of a better way to put it. Yeah. Because
there might very well be a ghost of Anne Morgan, but her story was very much limited to folklore, and she was the caricature of a witch. She was very much your kind of bog standard wicked witch, stealing the souls of young men, tempted, all sorts of that kind of thing. So she's from an area called Much Wenlock. The wider Much Wenlock area is kind of made up of kind of small villages, farming, agriculture. It's that kind of very quaint chocolate box English village type thing. And she was baptized in 1791. I was able to find baptism records. So she's product of the 1700s, but very much lived during the 1800s. And basically, she was a woman who, in my opinion, was only ever going to be an individual. She was only ever going to be quite atypical to the situation of the Victorian England, and her circumstances emphasize that. So she was born in 1791, grew up in an area called Bourton, which is near Much Wenlock. It's just literally a mile down the road. And her house was on Westwood Common, and they were lime kiln and limestone foundry workers, and they're called the Five Chimneys, the area. The houses are all gone now. They were knocked down in the 1960s. But nothing really is told about Anne until 1809, when she was still a relatively young girl, but she was implicated in a robbery for the house that she's working in. So she's working in service alongside a girl called Mary Beermond. Mary Beermond, interestingly, her mother was the last person to do penance in a white sheet for cheating on her husband. So that all the way through Anne Morgan's story is the idea that she associates with people who are less than salubrious, and she is a bit like that as well. But basically, they were working at this big posh house, and one of them takes it on themselves to steal from the lady of the house. And they both get caught. They both get tried for it. It's not clear which one is the one that has instigated it, but Anne was found with all the stuff, so I'm probably safe to say probably Anne. Mary is she's transported, 7 years transportation in Australia. Anne is given a indefinite amount of time in prison. I can't find exactly how long her sentence is, but I am working on that. But flash forward, she comes out of prison, and she's still relatively young. She's probably on the shelf by Victorian standards because she wasn't married and had a few kids by then. She's faced with the very real, a difficult situation that she is an unmarried woman who's been to prison, who's seen then as this kind of paragon of moral sin, but also probably sexual sin as well. So she's very much shunned from the local community. The local community is working class, but they see themselves as good folk, honest folk, not the sort of folk that go to prison. That's over in Madeley, where I grew up. People go to prison there, not in Much Wenlock. So she's kicked out. Her parents kick her out. She's shunned from the local community. And really, at this point, it's looking like the workhouse is the only place she's going to end up because she's destitute. But luckily for her, the local community is very much on the route of the travelling community. So kind of Irish and Roma travellers would come to Shropshire. They would work as itinerant workers, and they'd move on to the next place. And she starts talking to these travellers, and they sympathise with her plight. They simplify. I can't speak. Sympathise.
Right.
There we go. Sympathise with her situation, and they take her in. And essentially, she becomes part of their community, moving with them, travelling with them. He is said to have taken up unchristian ways. So, quite frankly, she's having the time of her life, really. Because if anything that's deemed unchristian in the Victorian times is probably lots of fun. And we lose the track of her for a little bit. But whilst she's with the travelling community, she's taught how to essentially read cards, read fortunes, and all the trappings of kind of fortune telling as a mean of making a bit of money. Regardless of kind of your stance on it, it was in a lot of ways very liberating for her, because that meant that she was able to earn her own money.
Right.
At a time when women really had one sphere, and that was the domestic sphere. So she is apparently really bloody good at it as well. She's meant to be really very good at reading fortunes, palms, all that kind of thing. So as I said, she kind of travels around enjoying her life. She's got kind of a common law husband. That's where her name Morgan comes from. And one day she just rocks back up at Westford Common. And apparently it's because her father had died and she wants his house. So she gets it. She moves in, and I've found records of her from 1841. So I know she was definitely living back in Shropshire in 1841.
Okay.
And quite quickly, she starts to sell her wares in the same way that she'd done on the road. So she starts reading fortunes, palmistry, a bit of astrology, but also she begins to sell curses. And her curses... Yeah, she's a queen. And her curses were meant to be so powerful they could hit the heart of a person and ruin their life. But also she does things like love potions and all of the things you tend to see cunning folk in the 1800s doing. And she's really good at what she's doing. She, in a lot of ways, I think she's a very remarkable businesswoman as well, because she makes a fortune selling these curses and charms and finding out whether someone's husband's going to leave them and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And she's said to have even had ladies of good standing from the local community go to her. So it's not just the working folk. And you get this situation where she's a commodity to the community. They need her for her services, but she's ostracized from the community too.
Right.
And suddenly these stories start to develop where she's this wicked witch and she's in league with the devil and she's sold her soul to the devil and all these things about her having the evil eye. And if you walk past her, you must avoid her gaze because she'll curse you.
Oh, boy.
And actually, I think all of the evidence points to the idea that she actually quite enjoyed the stereotypes that she was getting. I think she got to the stage where she thought, I can't beat them, so I'm going to join them. And she started to really play up to this image of her being a witch. So she was a great animal lover. She loved animals. And she was said to have a whole host of cats called things like Hellblow and Satan's Smile. You don't do that unless you enjoy the theatrical side of it. And also she kept a box of toads, like so many witches in Shropshire. And she used to feed the toads exclusively on communion wafers. So again, that's a perversion of kind of all that's holy. So she's enjoying herself. And I do think there is an element of her being like, well, these people think I'm a witch, so let's put on a show. And there's so many stories that develop in this period that are probably folklore, but they all add to the narrative of her being a witch. So there's one where her house was on kind of the same route as a pack horse route. So people would go from the lime kiln and the quarry down through into other parts of Shropshire. And she would kind of police the road a little bit. So if she saw anyone who was not being kind to their animals, she would basically give them a bit of a what for. Yeah. And one time she saw a chap who had really overlaid his donkey, and she told him, take it off, that's not fair. He refused, so she put a curse on him where he was frozen to the spot, and the donkey went on its way without the stuff. So it's probably not true, but it adds to the mystique of this woman and the legend of this woman that went far beyond her immediate community. Really, the story starts again in 1856 when her husband dies, and she very quickly takes a younger lover, which fair play, whatever floats your boat.
Yeah.
And at the time, there's very much this idea that they were either just housemates or she had ensnared this young man, because why would a 60-year-old woman be able to get a 35-year-old man? But everything, in my opinion, points to them being in a romantic relationship. Not a very healthy one, a very abusive one on both parts, but certainly a romantic situation. And they argued a lot, they quarrelled a lot, and certainly there's an element of him using Anne for her money as well, because she was a very wealthy woman from what she heard, and she'd earned it all herself. It was, nobody had given her anything, but through her skills, in inverted commas, she was able to get quite a fortune. Then on the 12th of September 1857, Anne Morgan was stabbed to death in her home on West Common. I know.
Wow.
And William Davis was the man who did it, her lover, her toy boy lover. And it said that on the day they'd been quarrelling because she'd sent him to the kind of local shop to go and buy some food for dinner, and he'd spent it all in the pub. So there was an argument outside on the street, which then they calmed down a bit, got into the house, carried on arguing. He stabbed her to death and then fled. And the reports at the time of kind of the coroner's reports they make for really difficult reading, because she'd been absolutely kind of brutalized, and it really is awful to think about a woman who had been so vigorous and so much of a character, and this big, vibrant woman actually being reduced to the death that she had. And eventually it was taken to trial, but there's kind of a bit of a smear campaign that goes on all the way through the trial and even before, where you see in the newspapers things like people saying no one cared about her death and no one mourned her. But actually her family lived a few doors opposite. And one of the witnesses who spoke at the trial was a 10-year-old boy who was her great nephew. And he was said to fight back the tears while he was describing what he saw and what happened. So it's very clear this woman had been cared about. She had family that did see her as important. And I think it really shows you just some of the language they used to describe her, how scary it was in the Victorian times for a woman to exist outside of the spheres of normality, to be different. And it's taken to trial, and the defense seems to really play on the idea that she was a witch. And they create this narrative, which is insane, thinking in the 1850s that they could use the old trope of the wicked witch, but they did. And they said that poor William, poor, weak, silly and inoffensive William, which is a direct quote from the newspapers, had been in this magical thraldom where he had been under the spell, and the only way to break the spell would be to kill the witch. And
wow, that's quite the defense.
Yeah. It boggles the mind. But there is an idea in folklore that if you bleed a witch, that actually that will stop the curse, and that will be able to take away the kind of powers of the witch. So there was this idea that it does fit in with the folklore a little bit.
Right.
They said that she was this wicked woman and he was this weak man, and the only way he could get away was to kill her. And there's also all sorts of people come out and kind of collaborate with it and say, oh, it's so bad, she was so evil, and the same narrative that we now still have in the folklore. And also there's really quite a horrible way to be buried, but she was taken from the murder site and she was buried in the clothes that she was murdered in. Wow. They didn't even think to put her other shoe on her foot. So she was buried with one shoe on, covered in blood still, in an unmarked grave in Borton. I was actually able to find the burial records to cement where she was. I can't find the grave because it was unmarked, but I know which churchyard she's in now. So she's in Borton Cemetery. So there was no regard at all for this woman in death. And
Her family didn't even intervene in that?
It was probably very much that they weren't allowed to.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, let's just not get involved.
Yeah,
Then we'll get ostracized. And
and she even had all of her things taken down to the local pub courtyard and burned because there was a fear that either her spirit would walk and the community would gain a ghost, or equally the idea that she would someone would get her stuff and maybe get the wrong idea and they'd gain a new witch. Because one of the biggest condemnations about Anne Morgan was the fact that she could read and she had wicked books full of evil poems and spells, and in reality they were probably books about divination or astrology or something like that, but her reading was something that scared the community enough to burn away any trace of her. And there's so many things that make me angry about the story. And I think the fact that he was sentenced to death at first, but that was acquitted and he got transportation. We lose trail of him after the sentence, and that's something I'm working on. I'd like to know what happened to him afterwards, because he was so much younger than Anne. But folklore says that she got her final revenge and she sunk the boat as it was sailing to Australia. So hopefully that's not the case. But it really is a story, I think, that shows you how a woman who was not the norm in Victorian society was seen. But also, I think it's the idea that witchcraft was still, we tend to have this idea of witchcraft being a thing that people in the early modern period were scared of. But actually, this was the 1850s. This was the 1800s. It's a relatively, at least I studied medieval history, so in my mind, it's the other day. But it's a relatively not that far away time, really.
Right.
And then you've got this idea that she was so much of a problem to the community, they had to burn away any trace of her. And I just think her story is so evocative and it needs to be shared and remembered, because actually how many other women like her were murdered either under the guise of witchcraft through things like the witch trials in Europe and abroad, but then also how many other women had been victims of a situation, a domestic situation like she was. Because ultimately, no matter how remarkable she was and complex she was, and, you know, I'm by no means saying that she was a saint, because she was probably quite a formidable woman and she was probably quite difficult at times, but she still didn't deserve to be murdered. And I think I'm very passionate about sharing her story, because not only is it an example of a fairly recent witch case, it also is a woman who defied any expectations, and she endured as well. Every time she was faced with adversity until her death, she continued and she endured and she carried on and she found a way. So for me, Anne Morgan is a wonderful, and she's just this character that I think deserves so much more than the Wicked Witch trope.
Well, it's a remarkable story. It's really incredible. Thank you for you just that was like watching a movie. But it's karmically setting aside or the horrific death, but there's a karmic sort of victory for her in a way. If you really think of it, you're here talking about her in 2026. And this town, the people, then they burn all her stuff to erase her from the community. But it's like she endures to today, and nobody knows who these people were that burned. I mean, you might know because you have the records or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's like some random shopkeep or whatever, and people in the town and everything. Like, she's the one that we're still talking about, despite their efforts to erase her. It comes back. She comes bigger out of it. So it's karmically a good thing.
I love that idea, actually. And I think it's I think it shows us what the fear of witches can make people do.
Right.
And it's that fear. Fear is such a tangible thing, isn't it? And it's such a powerful thing. And actually, the fear of her becoming something other than human, either a witch or a ghost, made the whole community turn against her. And I think that's still something our witch isn't a witch anymore. It is in some certain cultures. There's still very much active witch trials happening and witch persecution happening. But our witches aren't witches anymore. But that tangible fear of someone can make a person do terrible things. And I think she's just so symbolic of so much. And I'm just grateful that I'm able to continue that legacy and share her story.
Now, you mentioned it a couple times, and you actually kind of answered the question, but I'll ask, would like to know a little bit more about it, because you said, I had it here, and I'm like, I was like, we get back to this. The gal who was involved in the stealing, possibly, whatever, you said she got transported, and then later you got to the murderer. He also got
Yes.
And when you first said it, I was like, does she mean sent to Australia? And so that was that time period when people, because I always hear, Australia started as a prison colony. So these are like the people that were sent there, these kind of folks.
Yeah. So this is quite late in the transportation, because transportation kind of middle of the 1700s. I'm being really, really rough guesstimate there, but this is quite late in the history of transportation, but certainly it was still happening in kind of the Victorian times or the early 1800s. And these very much would be the sort of crimes you could get transported for. But really there was, in the period of like the Bloody Code in the 1700s, there was all sorts you could get transported for or executed for. It's a whole different thing in itself. But yeah, they both, I've managed to find the records for them both being sent to Australia. Haven't found anything else yet, but that's very much something I'm going to keep working on.
Now, you may not necessarily know this. It's completely out of left field, but just to stay on that topic briefly, what happens when you get to Australia? Do they just kick you off the boat and they're like, all right, you live here now? Do you go into prison down there? How does it work?
So it depends. So certain times it was very much just like, this is you now, that's you. Go and sort yourself out. There was kind of prison colonies there where you would kind of do like hard labor and things like that. But I think it really depended on the jury and the judge, but also kind of the period of history in which it was part of. So I think the earlier time, it was very much that idea of kind of, I think everyone would have been in the prison colony at some point. Hard labour played quite a big part of it. But then also, if you'd done your 5 years or your 7 years, you could stay there and you could set up yourself. And there are examples of people who kind of dragged themselves up from prison and ended up being quite successful in Australia and other prison colonies because they'd finished their sentence. They thought, well, I'm not going back to England, and stayed over there and married and set up businesses and stuff. So it's a whole kind of fascinating period of history. And
it's crazy.
I think that the history of that nation changed because of our convicts is interesting in itself.
Now let's talk about another one of your posts, Unquiet Spirits, the art of ghost laying in Shropshire. Ghost laying, I know what it is because I read the thing, and it just stood out to me. This is such an interesting process or technique, or I don't know how I would even describe it, but tell us about this ghost laying thing.
So it's very secretive. But the general premise is the idea that if you have a troublesome spirit, you enact some form of ritual, which usually involves the clergy, and that spirit is trapped in a bottle. And this is something you find across England, but there seems to be a real kind of precedent of it happening in Shropshire around about the 1700s. So we get stories of kind of vicars battling demonic bulls and managing to shrink them down to get into a bottle and all sorts of things. But the basic premise is if you have a very troublesome spirit, you would call upon the local clergy and they would complete a ritual, usually around the graveside. And this ritual would first bring the spirit up from the grave so you're able to physically see it. And then it would shrink it down small enough to trap in some form of item. It's usually a bottle in Shropshire, but I have read elsewhere in England it even being something like a shoe. But it's not always successful. And actually, it's not always too very healthy for the clergy. There are stories in Shropshire where there's clergymen that die afterwards, that kind of survive the process and then die afterwards or die during the process. And it very much fits in kind of that quasi-folkloric idea of it's written about and talked about in folklore. There's not much evidence that these rituals actually happened, but also then equally we can't say they didn't. And certainly things like exorcism, proto-exorcisms, they're all very much real rituals that the clergy does. So it's understandable then that something like this, even if it wasn't as dramatic as the folklore describes it to be, is happened or could happen. And then also that could be one of the reasons why it's not so much spoken about, or we don't know the nitty-gritty of the ritual.
Right. Yeah.
If it's something that the local community know that the clergy do, but they haven't been able to witness it because witnesses aren't allowed to be there. It's not something, it's very much seen as the duty of the clergy, that they wouldn't be able to tell you the details. They wouldn't be able to go,
how to do it.
Yeah, this psalm and then this psalm and then this prayer and then the ghost goes boof. But they'd know it happened. And it's across kind of the county. There's different stories of it. And it all basically ends up in a ghost getting trapped, and then that ghost in the vessel, in the bottle or what have you, being put somewhere where they can't be disturbed. So it's either in a body of water, because there's an idea that water accesses the spirit world, so you it keeps them physically down, or also in like the threshold of churches, so either near the door step of a church or kind of the altar of a church as well. So it's fascinating, and there does seem to be a real concentration of these stories in the 1700s.
Now, do they find these from time to time, right? These bottles?
Yes, there has been a bottle found. So there's my favourite story was the story of Elizabeth Brown, which I no doubt will let you know in a moment. But they did actually find a bottle when they renovated the church. So there's no proof it's got Elizabeth in it, but certainly they put it back where they found it in case.
Yeah, I've seen some of these before, like these pictures of them. They're pretty, So what's this? Tell me the story of Elizabeth Brown.
So I love Elizabeth. She's another character a bit like Anne Morgan. And it's set in the 1700s. So she was a very kind of odd woman. I love odd women. I'm a self-proclaimed odd woman myself. But she didn't really go to church. She didn't like people. She loved the woods, and she would spend her time walking around the woods, talking to the birds and the animals and herbalism. And she really, in a lot of ways, she would have been described as a witch for her behaviour. But she kept herself to herself, didn't really cause any major issues for the community, so they just let her be. And it's in an area called Stanton upon Heathhine, which is kind of up in North Shropshire. And she got to live to the grand old age of 92. I think it's because she was unproblematic and just lived her own way. And in 1777, she was on her deathbed, and she said that she had one request, and that was that she was buried in her beloved woods. So her family, there wasn't much of her family left, but the family that she did have followed her requests, and upon her dying, they buried her in the woods. And everything was fine for a while, but then they started to see her spirit walking around the woods as she'd done in life.
Oh, wow.
And she wasn't angry, she wasn't causing any issues, but she was just wandering around the woods. But then some of the people in the village were a little bit spooked by this, or thought maybe it would put the wrong impression of the village across. So they decided the best thing to do would be to dig her up, as you do, and bury her in consecrated ground, because if she's in consecrated ground, she can't wander, she can't cause any issues. So they go against Elizabeth's wishes and they bury her in the churchyard, and that is when it all goes down. So Elizabeth is more than a little bit annoyed by this, and she comes again. So she starts wandering around the village, angry. She starts being seen in people's houses. She starts chasing cattle, kicking down other people's gravestones. And there's a record as well of her ghost being seen sat on a boundary rock outside the village, insulting people as they walk by.
Oh, wow.
Apparently her insults were so vile that they thought they needed to do something about it. So they called upon the local vicar. He said, absolutely not, I'm not getting involved. So they ended up writing a load of letters to different vicars, according to the folklore, and a team of, I believe it was 12 clergymen descended upon the village. Different stories or versions of the story say slightly different number. And the men went to her graveside and began doing the ritual. She was very, very angry. And she fought back, really did physically cause a lot of issues for the clergymen. But eventually they were able to shrink her right down, her spirit, so it was small enough to be in a bottle, and then they buried her in the church. I think all of that could have been avoided if they'd have just left her in the woods where she was happy.
In the woods, yeah.
And there has been sightings of her ghost, but nothing near like what it was before. But really, she's been quiet. And the interesting thing about ghost laying is that there's a quantifiable amount of time that this spirit will be trapped before then it goes, right, it's back in the world. Sometimes it's 99 years, sometimes it's 100 years, and sometimes it's 1,000 years. There's been no versions written, because there's a few written accounts of Elizabeth's story. There's no versions that say 1,000 years. So ideally, she's out in the world somewhere, wandering as a ghost. And I just think, again, it's this story of an odd woman living her own way, living her truth, and then people telling her in death how she should be. And then she goes, right, actually, I'm going to make you all my problem. I'm going to be your problem. I'm going to cause those issues for you.
Yeah.
But I think it's also interesting because, again, it's that idea of a secretive ritual that only certain clergy can do. It's very much, in my mind, similar to exorcisms. It's a proto-exorcism. How much it was done, we don't know, because it's not the sort of thing polite society talked about.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to believe there would have been a ritual that would have been very similar to the ghost laying process that did happen, at least enough for these stories to seed and develop. And even if it didn't happen in Stanton upon Heathfine in the 1770s, the story was influenced by something else, I think. It was a practice. And interestingly, you do see some of them having quite elaborate things where it's like, they're going to go and they took the bottle to the Red Sea or the River Nile. And it's like, this is a farmer in Shropshire in the 1700s. They probably put it in their pond. But there's a kind of elaborateness about it, which I think is brilliant. But the ritual itself, and there's loads of examples. There's certain places as well which are said to be hotspots for ghost bottles. So down in Ludlow in South Shropshire, Dinham Bridge, underneath the bridge is said to be where a lot of ghost bottles are dumped. There's a place near the Wrekin, which is a hill in Telford, called Dairy Pit, and Dairy Pit was meant to be a site where they laid a lot of ghosts, but some of the bottles broke as they were put in the pit under the water, and the spirits now wander. And
that's what I was going to ask. Are there any accounts of someone opening the bottle later or breaking? But
opening in Shropshire, there are elsewhere in England of them opening it by mistake and getting kind of haunted. But in the best example of them breaking is Dairy Pit, because there's a number of ghosts that haunt there anyway. There's meant to be a mermaid in the waters, which for a landlocked county like Shropshire, it's pretty cool. We have mermaids. But apparently a few of the bottles would have broken, and that's why there's such a ghostly presence. And I go up to Dairy Pit quite a bit because it's on one of my walking routes, and it is a bit weird up there, I've got to say. We know it's an old bell pit, which is kind of like a proto kind of early form of mining. It's a shallow mining process, but it's got filled with water, and there is a bit of a vibe about the place. It's a bit creepy. I don't know if it's just because I've read about it, but yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, it's wild. I'm listening here, and I'm very thankful, really appreciative. I'm really lucky to have a show like this that I can hear these crazy stories and learn so much. I'm having so much fun.
Thank you.
I feel bad because I'm kind of just like, now tell me this story.
Great.
Because now I want to talk about the Shropshire man monkey, old Ned's devil. Because I got a kind of an affinity for the creatures and the sort of Bigfoot-like animals.
Yes, yeah.
Various weird creatures are always fun because ghosts are one thing, but then it's like creatures are like a physical. And just to actually, I did want to say we're talking about Elizabeth Brown. A lot of that stuff, I kind of believe a lot of the stuff you're talking about here in a sense where it's like, okay, they saw her spirit in the woods. Like, maybe I'm crazy, but I think that I believe that. I believe that they maybe saw something. Could be either the residual energy of her there or sort of her visiting. Like, I believe that. That's not really crazy. I guess people who aren't sort of into this stuff, they're probably like, what are you, nuts? But to me, it's like, no, that sounds perfectly plausible.
Yeah, why not? I always say as a folklorist, whether or not ghosts exist doesn't matter because it's what they represent. But as a person, 100%, I think there's something in it because why have we got them as far back as ancient Mesopotamia? So I think,
right.
I think it's not any weirder saying that they saw our last Elizabeth Brown wandering as it is any of the things that I'm a religious studies teacher, any of the things that religion claims or anything like that. It's all these otherworldly anomalous experiences. There's got to be something. There's got to be a reason. I think that's what's so exciting about Shropshire folklore is that there's so much that makes you go, what?
Right.
Really?
Yeah.
And for a county that is relatively unknown, there is so much stuff that actually should be more well known. And I think actually the man monkey is one of them. He is brilliant. So I'm a big Bigfoot fan too, but just to drop that in. But basically, there is a canal that runs through Shropshire, through other counties like Cheshire. It goes as far as Cheshire, actually. And on that canal, under a certain bridge, there is said to have been the sighting of a man monkey. Now, there's a debate with the man monkey whether or not he is a spirit or whether he is more of a kind of cryptid, physical thing. And the most famous case, because there's been sightings of him as late as 2002.
It's fairly, it's
fairly recent. But the most famous case took place in 1879, and that's the one that Charlotte Byrne, the Shropshire folklorist of the Victorian times, actually wrote about, and she investigated herself. And she's an interesting woman because she took a dim view of a lot of things. She wouldn't have been a fan of me, I think, because she didn't like from where I was from. She used to talk about the East Shropshire coalfield and the people of the East Shropshire coalfield being a bit rough and ready and a bit superstitious. And it's like, thanks, love. I love it. I do love her. And she wrote about this event. So basically, at 10 o'clock at night on the 21st of January 1879, there was a man who was riding the canal on his horse, and he was travelling from one village further up the canal to another. And it was the easiest route because it was straight as the crow flies. It was easy to get there. And when he got near this certain bridge, he turned round very suddenly because he felt almost his horse jolt, looked around, and he saw this great big hairy beast-like creature, the man monkey. Now, it's specifically described in all of the accounts as being a man monkey because it looks kind of humanoid, but then also very ape-like. And it's said to have had great big white eyes. In some regards, in some accounts, it's regarded as having eyes like dinner plates and an evil snarling mouth. And it clung to the back of his horse. And obviously, his horse is panicking, so it's going faster than usual. And he does all that he can think of doing, and he grabs his horsewhip and he whips the man monkey, hoping that it'll fall off.
Oh, yeah.
But the whip goes right through it and falls to the ground.
Wow.
So there's some precedence that it might be a spirit with that happening.
Spectral. Yeah.
But before that, it had looked very solid. It had looked like you and me kind of thing. So he just thought, I need to just ride. I need to get to the nearest village. So he rode as fast as his horse could, take him with the creature still on the horse's back. Got to the local pub and got off the horse, didn't even look behind him, went to bed, and he was taken with fright.
I thought you were going to say he ran and got help. So he just went to bed.
To bed. He asked for a bed, stayed there, and he was taken with fright for about 3 days, and he just didn't get out of bed. He was in a right state, and then finally, the local community of that village were probably a bit worried about this stranger that had rode in a panic, asked for a room, and then crashed out for 3 days.
Okay, yeah, I see police there. All right.
And they call the local constable, and the police comes, interviews him, and he describes the thing in vivid detail and in absolute fright and terror about this evil man monkey that scared him. And the police officer, really nonchalant, just goes, "Oh, is that it, sir? Yeah, that's been happening for ages since a bloke drowned near the site. Yeah, that happens all the time. Oh, I thought something serious had happened." And that's where the story ends with regard to that experience. Certainly, I imagine the man was never quite over that. But then we have sporadic kind of sightings up and down the Shropshire Union Canal for a very long time. And the kind of the latest, as I've said, that I've managed to find is 2002, when there was a man, he had gone on a canal holiday, and he was sailing under the same bridge. He looked up and the man monkey was stood on the bridge, and it was said to smile at him. So he called his wife, come on. And by the time his wife had got there was absolutely nothing there. And they all thought he'd gone a bit wrong. The interesting thing is that it's not the only report of an ape-like creature in the wider area. So Old Ned's Devil was not in Shropshire, it's in near Birmingham. So it's still in the West Midlands, and it was said to be an ape-like creature that walked the canals, that was said to scare people, and very similar in a lot of ways to the descriptions of the man monkey. But the difference is that Old Ned's Devil was very much a creature of flesh and blood, because they shot him and put him on display in the local pub in Smethwick.
Oh, wow.
So
when was this?
This was in the 1800s as well, so it was 1880s, so around about the same time. And apparently it was on display in the pub up until the 30s. I've managed to find as concrete.
Do they have pictures?
I've never been able to find pictures, but I'm sure there'd be some somewhere. But it's the idea of this creature being, look at this. This is our claim to fame. We've got Old Ned's Devil. Some people have linked the two, and they've said, "Oh, Old Ned's Devil must have been what was seen on the canal in Shropshire." But that begs the question, and doesn't really answer the question, as why did the man's whip go through the monkey?
Right.
And why has it still been seen as early as 2002? So I love it because we look so often in England at folklore like ghosts and folklore like witches, and I'm a big lover of the devil folklore, but we never really look at cryptids, or what we would call in other parts of the world cryptids. And certainly the man monkey is very much in the same vein as that. And we don't really know. There's not really a concrete answer with him as to what he was or, why he was. But certainly, at least in the Victorian period, he was linked to that suicide or that drowning. In some versions, it's a suicide. In some versions, it's a worker that fell in of that man who died in the canal. So it's just so interesting, and it poses as many questions as I think it answers, and it leaves you to consider, could it have been, because some of the people at the time said, oh, maybe it was an escaped ape that had escaped from the zoo. And certainly old Ned's Devil, there's an idea it might have escaped from a local travelling zoo. But then also it was described as being far bigger than a normal ape. But then how many people, your average person in the Victorian times, did they really know how big an ape could get?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I wouldn't know. Yeah, I would know. If you show me a picture of an ape, you're like, well, how's that in comparison? I'd be like, that's big, I guess. Yeah.
So I just think he's wonderful. And I love the idea of, obviously I wouldn't if it was me, but looking up as I'm on a lovely little canal holiday and seeing an ape that smiles at me, at least he's semi-friendly because he's going to smile at people as they go past.
That's brilliant. True. Yeah. Now, I was thinking of this earlier. You mentioned fairies, and it was a sort of interesting sort of the taxonomy in a way where it's like, you get and I don't even know if that's the right word, but you get like the leprechauns in Ireland. So I think Scotland, do they have little people? Yeah,
there's fairy folk in Scotland.
So that's in fair. So, and then, so does England sort of also, because you never hear about like an English leprechaun, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. So what is it in England? Just fairies, essentially?
Yeah, so there's fairies in certain places. There's things like pixies as well, and in places like Cornwall, you've got things called knockers that tend to be in mines. So miners would believe that there was kind of fairy, fey-like creatures that would knock on the mine, and whenever they heard it, it would be the kind of knockers either telling them that there was going to be something wrong or helping them find their way out. And you get all sorts of kind of mining related folklore linked to that. In Shropshire, we have fairies. They're very secretive, as fairies should be, I suppose. And you don't really ever get any massive descriptions of them. When they are seen, they're described as wearing like little diminutive hats and little green or red coats. But there's certain areas that are meant to link to them. The strangest, in my opinion, is Coalbrookdale, which is in Telford, where I come from. Coalbrookdale is the kind of the area that the Industrial Revolution kind of happened. So it was a very industrialized area. It was described as being a veritable descent into the hell in the 1700s because it was smog and fire and ash and all that kind of thing. But actually there was a field in Coalbrookdale that apparently if you went to at night, you could see fairies. So it's bizarre to think. But there's also in England things like brownies and household spirits that kind of take on a fey-like guise. But they are certainly prevalent in England, but I think they have their own regional variety. So they might be called slightly different in one area in comparison to another. Fae or fairy is the broader name.
Right. Yes, of course, yeah.
But we don't have many examples of regional specific ones in Shropshire. It is only really, that field has fairies, or there's a warehouse, there's a building with fairies, and it's not like a pixie or a knocker or anything like that.
Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. It's remarkable because we just, there's such a rich history over there in all those countries. And it's like here that we're very detached from all of that. We don't really have sort of, there is Native American stuff, but people, just the people who live here are detached from the Native Americans. So it's like, they don't know anything about them themselves, seems like, for the most part. The general public, it's not like a sort of shared learned history of sort of these elemental beings in a sense. It's like people here think that that's stuff that's over there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No one really kind of considers like little people or things like that or elementals at all here. It's very detached, which is disappointing. Because I would like it if there were more little beings and things of that nature
Cool. Yeah.
popping up everywhere,
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Nine Men of Madeley. That's another one of your fantastic blog posts. And like I said, folks, they are tremendous. They're super detailed. I really enjoy them. Well, you get the plug in again here. It's nearly knowledgeable history.blogspot.com. So go and check these out. But let's talk about the Nine Men of Madeley.
So the Nine Men of Madeley is not so much one of my folklore posts. It's a history post. Right. But Madeley is the community I grew up in. And it was a story that I literally, I can remember knowing from as early as I can remember, really. It was told to us in primary school. It was told to us when we were very young.
Oh, wow.
And I think partly it's because of the nature of it. So it's called the Nine Men of Madeley, but actually a lot of the victims, it's a mining disaster. A lot of the victims of the mining disaster were actually 12, 14. They weren't men by Victorian standards. So, and I think within my local community, I think with the whole of Shropshire, there's a pride in our history. But within my part of Shropshire, because of the industrial history and the working class history, and the fact that actually a lot of families don't really leave the area, there's a real pride in our history, to the point where I did my family tree and I've gone 400 years back and they've gone 5 miles up the gorge. So,
wow.
We don't leave Telford. If some of us do. I did, and then I moved back. But this, basically, the Nine Men of Madeley, it's all takes place at a pit, Brickkiln Leaso pit, and they were very, very young, a lot of them. Rather bizarrely, I work in the community now, and I went to school in the community, a different school that I work in now, and I walked to school the same way that these boys would walk to work, which I can't fathom. But it was a disaster that took the lives of 9 individuals. So it was on Tuesday, the 27th of September, 1864. And the pit itself, it was an ironstone pit. It was around 220 metres deep. The Madeley Wood Company owned it, and they owned everything in the area. It was kind of the main employer in the area. And these men had started the day like anything else, walking to work, chatting as they went, and it was right at the end of their shift when this disaster happened.
Yeah.
So they would, in order to get down the pit and then back up the pit, they would have rode a piece of equipment called the doubles. And it was essentially kind of a central chain, which was about 3 meters long in this instance. And it was attached to 4 kind of chain circles. It was very primitive kind of machinery.
Yeah.
And there was 2 seats on either side of the chain. So at the top of the main chain, there was a hook and a safety catch, and there was an iron canopy, which was like the bonnet, and that was meant to protect the people as they went down from any falling debris or when they went back up.
Okay.
There was a man on the surface who was the banksman, and he was the one that was in charge of ensuring the safety, bringing them up and bringing them down. But it wasn't equipped for the amount of men that it was meant to have on it. So there was nine of them that were riding up, and it wasn't really suitable for that. If you read accounts of other mining communities across England, it was kind of the common practice because health and safety wasn't a thing in the 1800s.
Right. Well, it's like that with mining today still, I think. Mining's very dangerous.
Yeah.
They stretch the limits of what you should be doing. Yeah.
And I think these men were riding up. I know they were. They got about halfway up, and that's when the accident took place. It's very vague, and the details are vague about what actually happened because it all happened so quickly. But basically, the chain snapped, or the coupling that held the chain snapped, and it hurtled the miners down to the bottom of the pit, which was bad enough because it was 200 foot through 6 inches of solid oak board. And there was about 4 feet of kind of sump water underneath the board. if that wasn't bad enough, that probably in all reality would have killed them. But the iron fastening,
Yeah.
about £100 per kind of. They measure iron in kind of 100 weights. So per 100 weight, there is 112 pounds per 100 weight, and this was 100 weights. So it was ridiculously heavy, landed on top of them.
Oh,
so
jeez.
Unfortunately, these men didn't stand a chance. They died. All of them died. One of the saddest things is that the banksman would have heard it all, would have felt very responsible for it, because this was an accident, but he would have lived for a very long time afterwards above surface, feeling like he was to blame. And I can't imagine the emotional reaction for that man and for him, what he had to deal with. But quite quickly, the alarm was raised and people knew that this event had happened. Madeley now is a very tight-knit community, but Madeley then very much even more so. We have lots of newspaper records of the time, and they do make for really hard reading. It is very sad. They describe the scene as heart-rending to the extreme, that the mouth of the pit was surrounded by anxious inquirers after friends, and many had actually came to the scene of the accident to find out what had happened. Obviously, with something that's the nature of this, they had to get the bodies out.
Right.
So, because it was still a working pit.
Yeah, they don't have the thing to broke. Yeah.
Yeah. So very quickly, almost really in the immediate aftermath of hearing that this had happened, they were asking for volunteers to bring up the bodies. And I can't imagine that job. And, even, the only thing that separates us from the past is the centuries. We still had the same emotional reaction to things, but the strength of those men to be able to go down and pick their friends up and bring them back to the surface. And there's kind of reports of them being mangled, and they had to bring bags to take the bags down. So then they didn't bring the bodies up to the surface.
Right.
How badly they were injured.
Yeah.
And there's a really powerful newspaper account that was in a newspaper called the Wolverhampton Chronicle. And it said that when darkness fell after they'd got the bodies up, hundreds of people congregated on the bank of the pit with candles, and they all kind of had a vigil for the men. And I think it's just so sad and so hard for the community to have imagined that the only thing they could do was gather and show that respect. It must have been, it was described as a gloom cast over the entire neighbourhood. And, I think the fact that some of these boys were 12, I teach 12-year-olds now, and the oldest of the group was Edward Wallet, who was 52, and his son was actually the banksman. So, so he'd have heard his dad die, which is just so sad.
Wow.
The next oldest was 37. And as I said, it goes all the way down to kind of 12 years old. And they did have a kind of inquest into the tragedy, and it was deemed an accident. And the funeral was held at the local church, and they gave the Madeley Wood Company, they were very good in terms of kind of Victorian employers could go. They gave all the miners in the wider area the day off, half a day off. It was the Victorian times, to see if they wanted to pay their respects. So there was even men who might have worked in a slightly different part of the coalfield still go in to visit to pay their respects, because mining, and I imagine it's the same even in more recent times, it's very close knit. It's a camaraderie. It's, you might not know that miner, but you know his experiences. So it's only a small churchyard, and it's only a relatively small road that leads to the church, but up to 4,000 people were there to pay their respects for these men. And they're still very much remembered to this day. And if you go to St Michael's Church where they're buried, there's 9 individual white graves, row on row, uniform with their initials on it, and that's where they're buried. So
yeah, it's very striking. Yeah,
it is. It's a very powerful image, and I think where to begin with it, it's just so sad, and it reflects the realities of the mining community. And actually, some of these men, at least one of them who was 35, he'd been down the mine since he was about 7 or 8 years old.
Oh, wow.
So part of the kind of silver lining, I suppose, of the Nine Men of Madeley is that this tragedy and there were several other tragedies in England that actually pushed the government to ensure that young boys couldn't go down the pits.
Yeah.
And there was an age limit on the pits. But I just can't imagine how that community must have felt. And even now, I'm 100 years later, over 100 years later, I still get emotional talking about it. I still feel so deeply for it because it happened within my community. Right. And bizarrely, some of the last names of the men were last names of people I went to school with. And it's just such a tragedy that is unquantifiable. And like I said, I can't imagine how those men who went down the pit to rescue the bodies would have felt afterwards, and particularly in a sort of time like the Victorians where you didn't talk about it and stiff up a lip and you don't mention any of these things. Yeah. The trauma those men must have held with them till their own passing must have just been immense.
I bet, yeah.
And it's been very important to me to share working class narratives when I am talking about history, but also things like the Nine Men of Madeley, because it's part of our collective heritage in the area.
Yeah, it's quite the story. It really is. It's interesting. I like what you said, that the only thing that separates us is the centuries. That people, emotions are the same throughout time. It's it's really a profound observation on your part. So just to lighten the mood, I meant to give you a shout out for you in the article on cryptids. You throw in a Milhouse Van Houten quote at the end. I thought. We are through the looking glass, people. Yeah, I love that. A Simpsons reference always.
My partner is the biggest Simpsons fan, to the point where sometimes he will quote things and I will think he's just being a bit odd, or he's saying something that's a bit kind of like, what? And he'll go, oh, it's a Simpsons quote. And he's the biggest fan. So yeah, that's where that came from.
I noticed it and appreciated it.
Yeah.
All right, now we're moving on to your projects you got going on. You got The Best of Men, which is a Shropshire folk horror. And this is fiction, right? This is some kind of, tell me about this, like a radio drama kind of?
Yes.
In a classic sense?
It's like an audio drama, radio drama. Right, so it's based on a lot of Shropshire folklore. So all of what I've spoken about tonight can be described as my obsession. But one of my biggest obsessions is the devil and devil folklore, because for whatever reason in Shropshire, we have this real wealth of devil folklore. It's bloody everywhere. The devil loves our county. So what I did was I took some of the stories about the devil in Shropshire and I created kind of a folk horror narrative based on it. So it's out there now. The first series is out and I'm working on a second series that'll be a little bit different. Yeah. But the basic premise is the idea of so many of these paranormal TV shows go looking for demonic energy and they go looking for the sensationalist idea. Yeah. What would happen if they actually did meet the devil?
Oh, no.
So not to give too much away, but The Best of Men charts the idea of, it plays on this paranormal TV show and sensationalism and maybe not portraying the paranormal in the truest sense, but then they also happen upon an ancient evil, which is the devil. And it was so much fun.
You wrote,
yeah.
Wow, kudos to you. I mean,
you
saw some blog posts and then you're writing a fiction. Yeah, that's tremendous. I'm really blown away.
Keep me busy.
Yeah. And now this is the what's next for you. Oh, where can people find the Best of Men? Is that
it's on all good. So it's under a group called Alternative Stories and Fake Realities. They produced it, and it's on Spotify. It's on kind of anywhere where you get your kind of podcasts. It can be found.
People are listening to this, yeah.
Right. And hopefully there'll be some news about the second series soon. I'm in the middle of writing it and rewriting it and driving myself insane with changes, but hopefully there'll be a second series. And yeah, so it's good fun. And other than that, I'm working on a book about the devil in Shropshire, because as I said, the devil is so prominent in Shropshire folklore that he really embodies a lot of our history, our culture. I believe the devil, at least in Shropshire's context, is a conduit for a community's opinions, its fears, thoughts, ideas. Yeah. And he's so distant, the folk devil, from the Abrahamic devil, the religious devil, that actually it's a different entity in all but name. So my book is charting kind of the influence of the devil in Shropshire, and also some of the stories and what they could show about the history of the area. So hopefully this will be the year I finish it, and we'll be able to get that out there and get it into the world, because the world needs devil folklore.
Well, when that comes out, I will get you back on the show. And if
that'd be cool.
Wait too long, we'll get you on for something else, because I've had an absolute blast. This was
thank you.
As I said, just kind of halfway through the show, I sort of just sat back and marveled. It's like, wow, I lead a charmed life. I really have such a good time. I'm just really having a good time hearing these stories, and you're just a tremendous guest. I had an absolute blast. It really was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks can check out nearlyknowledgeablehistory.blogspot.com. That's where you can find Amy's fantastic writings. And again, the fictional, the Shropshire folk horror is The Best of Men. So check that out wherever you're listening to this on. The show's over, folks. So now go and listen to The Best of Men. I am sending you off now. You know where you can go. So
thank you.
There you go. Thank you so much, Amy. I had a really great time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. And thank you for letting me info dump, because I've just given you all the facts, and it's great to know that you've enjoyed it.
It was my great pleasure. It really was.